Welcome to Under My Blanket, a lo-fi creation from under the surface. Every week I will strive to dive deep into my bedsheets, pun always intended, a bizarre and comical 30-minute pondering, heroically and masterfully themed around the blanket, and in them. Hey there, this is Miranda. This is the very first episode of Under My Blanket, a new series in Trenton Radio's Season Bizarre. I am here broadcasting live, but of course pre-recorded, from underneath my bedsheet in East City, Peterborough. I'm an occasional Trent Radio host. Typically, I broadcast with one or two other people during the summer of Trent Radio. I'd say over the past... Goodness, this is going to make me feel old. Over the past 8 years, I think I have had 3 shows. One most recently last summer, and previous to that, I had some shows with a couple of friends. So I'm not completely unaware of how Trent Radio works, but this idea of pre-recording things is kind of new to me and kind of really exciting. The show that you're listening to right now is called Under My Blanket. Again, that's literally because I've decided to do this recording from underneath my blanket. The bed that I am on is a mattress that I've had for, goodness, probably 8 years now. And it might not necessarily be the location that I'm doing all of these shows, because there's a tendency for me to get a little bit overheated in the summer, so I am here for the time being until it gets too hot in my room, but I promise to be underneath a blanket for the majority of the recordings at very least. I've been trying to test this out for the past little while, actually, and getting to do this recording underneath my blanket is showing me a lot of different things that I have forgotten in my very limited training when it comes to recording. I knew that I wanted to do the recording from underneath a blanket because I've attempted to record things outside, and there's a lot of additional loud noises. Shout out to those people that are currently at Trent Radio and making sure that there isn't anything crazy going on for this audio recording as well. But I did try to do the show once or twice already, and in the process of doing that, I have realized that sounds do actually pick up and get louder when I'm out in the open, and it's not just like background sounds that we're picking up. It's the very few times that I make any popping sounds with my mouth. It's a lot easier under the blanket, but also, like, I attempted to do this with headphones on in the very first one, and I've had to kind of adapt earbuds because the headphones would kind of smush against the side of my blanket. Feel like this might be, if anything, that serves as a proof that I'm doing it from under a blanket, because it's strange to picture a grown person doing such things, but I kind of wanted to nurture a wholesome environment, maybe throw you back to the time when you might have stayed or hung out underneath blankets, maybe, a sleepover, or a secret reading of a book that you just couldn't put down as a kid, or even like a blanket fort. Obviously, that might have even been the most obvious of the 3 examples of why you would ever be under a blanket. And I am loosely theming these shows around the idea of being under blankets, or revolving around blankets themselves. So I'm excited to bring a bunch of different ideas to Trent Radio for the show. The show itself, I want it to kind of reflect my personality and my interests, and that's kind of the best way, from my experience, to do a radio show, is to choose something that you're really into at the time and kind of focus on that, and use the radio itself to share that kind of interests, and hopefully there's somebody out there that actually is interested in the same thing and excited about the same stuff as you are. So yeah, I mean, Trent Radio for me is always been really an exciting place to be and experience, and it's kind of sad that we can't be there right now. But the fun thing that I decided to do is make sure that my radio show was right after one of my good friends. Flavius is the radio show right before mine, and he is the person actually that I was on the radio with last time I was in Trent Radio. And so it's kind of as if we have a show together again, even though he's in British Columbia and I'm here in Peterborough, Ontario. So that's pretty cool. It's nice to be able to share kind of a space and be able to share my thoughts in the same way with somebody that's not necessarily here, but not necessarily through things like Skype or Zoom. Like Skype and Zoom. So the blanket that I've decided to record underneath is one of the only blankets I actually own. I'm trying my best to stick to a minimalist kind of thought process when it comes to the things that I own. I don't feel like I need 5 different blankets. I feel like the blanket that I have is kind of like a middle winter and also summer blanket. It's a lighter material, so it keeps me warm. And also not too warm to the point where I'll take it off in the summer if I need to and just use a sheet. It's a blanket that I purchased actually on a whim. For those of you who don't know me, I 2 to 3 years ago was a teacher in Attawapiskat First Nation, and I was in my first year when I got this blanket, and I was living with my very first roommate. Yeah, my very first roommate in some stretches. So I've had roommates before, but not necessarily in places where I was getting the full roommate experience, I guess. I had roommates only as a couple with another person. And I feel like when you're a couple and you have a roommate, it feels a lot different. You usually just interact with your partner themselves and not necessarily your roommates as much, and so it's a completely different thing. And this is the first time I had a kind of a one-on-one roommate, and I was kind of excited for it, and I don't think I was let down by that experience at all. I mean, there were times where things would frustrate me, like I would have to struggle to understand how she did her chores or dishes and stuff. But then there was other times that were really sweet where she would make me cookies when she knew I was having a really hard time. And so definitely overall having this roommate and this experience was great for me. And this blanket is kind of a remembrance of that time. Sadly, because I am not necessarily the most excited around big box stores, I had to purchase this blanket from Walmart. I say had to because of the way that purchasing things really went up in Attawapiskat. If you're not aware or have never been to a northern reserve or a northern city, a lot of those northern reserves and cities have just one store or one main store, and a bunch of other little locally owned convenience stores, more like. And so the one store that I had access to regularly was called the Northern Store, and the Northern is definitely a store that is in almost every single community up north. And the Northern Store brand is actually owned by the same people that own Giant Tiger actually down here. And you would think that would mean that, things are less expensive and, that they have some discount prices. But unfortunately, as most of you who have even looked into the idea of possibly moving north would know, no, it's not necessarily the cheapest place to go shopping. It's definitely the opposite sometimes. And so buying things like blankets there was not something that I really wanted to do, because it was expensive and typically the selection was pretty limited. And so the only other option, unless I wanted to pay a ridiculous amount of shipping, was actually to purchase it from Walmart. Walmart actually was a saving grace for me when I was up there. Obviously, I'm not sponsored by Walmart. It just happened to be the only place in Canada that you could have things shipped for free, even to the most rural of postal codes. And so, this blanket came with me in my second year as well, when I went back to teach another year in Attawabascat. And it was kind of the first blanket I really bought on my own. As the youngest child in my family, I am accustomed to things like hand-me-downs. And so, except for during that time when I was in a long-term relationship and it ended really abruptly, I really didn't have things that were my own. Often I would get things from my parents, and this was the first kind of blanket I bought on my own, which is kind of exciting, especially when you're like freshly single or like living in a world where you get to kind of experience things on your own outside of your comfort zone. I definitely have like some really great feelings around this blanket and being in this blanket and just kind of experiencing the way that it is to be kind of on an adventure. And that's kind of a cool way to share it with you guys. Like, I feel like this is one of those experiences where we could kind of get together and we could talk about things, and maybe it would take time and appreciation for those things that we, generally speaking, just take for granted in our regular day-to-day lives. So this is a good little metaphor for you. And as a former English literature major, I am definitely a fan of a good metaphor. I definitely love that concept. And speaking of concepts, I kind of came up with the concept for the show from like a historical part of my life. I can even tell you the year, or at very least approximate year. It would have been like 2001, 2002. I was in the summer of my grade 8 year. I had just met a bunch of new people and had new experiences because I grew up in a small village near here named Havelock. And I remember going from one school to the next because in grade 7 in Havelock, at least when I was in school there, kids would go from grade 7 and then go on to the high school in grade 8 a year early, and they had this specific wing for the grade 8 students, and they still have that now. I had suddenly got to meet a bunch of new people, and I was a really outgoing kid, and sometimes still am, but I finally got to meet people that I thought of as of similar personality and interests as me, and that was really cool because growing up in a small town, especially when your parents, well, my mom was not from around there, and my dad was kind of a country kid, but he also had a very much like more open-minded mentality than a lot of parents there. I remember just being so excited in grade 8 to finally meet people that were more up my alley and better for me overall than the relationships I had cultivated before. And I mean, honestly, I'm sad to say that in that process of making these new friends, I had experiences where I lost some of my old friends, and regret definitely like the way that those relationships ended. And there's many of those kinds of regrets in my life because I'm not very good at maintaining relationships when I've had a change in that way, moving or whatever. Getting better at it as I get older, luckily. But I do remember in grade 8, just like the idea of meeting all these people was really exciting, and that led me to trying to expand my interests and horizons, and I started taking up the guitar. I was not really happy about the fact that I had an acoustic guitar. I still own the guitar to this day, but I wanted an electric guitar, and my parents gave me an acoustic guitar with a pickup, so at least it did have electric capabilities. It just wasn't, for playing rock music. It was more that I was having to be forced to potentially be playing country music, which wasn't really my thing back then. I was more of like a rock / like Janis Joplin was definitely like number one for me back then. But also like I liked some like angsty teenager music, and I would listen to like Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, acoustic guitar wasn't great, but that led me to the reason why I decided to do the show Under My Blankets. And when I was in that year, I picked up a little bit of guitar, enough that I had enough confidence that I decided that in the summer, when my mom found this program for sound recording, that I decided that I wanted to go. And I was definitely one of those kids that really enjoyed like listening to music and singing songs especially, so I was really gung-ho about the idea of getting to record my own singing, and my best friend at the time decided to come with me and do the same thing, as she was on a similar path, and she loved singing, and we played guitar together, and we had a really lame like 2-girl 2-guitar band in grade 8 called Genetically Altered Purple Daisies. And this is supposed to be cool, of course. This is like early 2000s cool, so it's Genetically Altered Purple Daisies. Short form was GAPT, which is like, sounds so wrong considering I was a grade 8 kid, but we thought that we were cool. And Megan has since then said that she's got some of our old music, which I find really funny, but I'm digressing a lot here. So basically I decided to do this specific show Underneath My Blanket because of this program that I got to do, where I went up to the top of Armour Hill and went to the Peterborough Museum and Archives and some various structures that existed around that area as well, and we decided that we were going to learn how to record music. And so although on the Trent Radio website and schedule it says that I am doing this as lo-fi, which it definitely is, I definitely have an overachiever problem, and I wanted to kind of utilize the skills that I learned. And I remember, and it still sticks with me to this day, that the guy there that was doing the lessons would tell us things like how his friends would, in order to record sound better in open spaces or in their own houses, but they would set up some sort of like foam around them, or he specifically mentioned a guy he knew that put mattresses along his walls, like old mattresses, which right now makes me feel kind of gross, because like whenever I see an old mattress on the side of the street, and maybe it's because I've lived in too many like kind of cheap rental places, I just always think of like bed bugs and stuff like that, because I've had bed bugs. But mattresses was the way he said that it got done, and that means that since I don't want to like surround myself with mattresses, blankets were the best option. So that is the reason why this show is called Under My Blanket, and I promise it will continue to be part of the mentality of the show and will continue to come up, so it's not just a literal me being under my blanket, which is cool in itself, I think, but I have a strange definition of what's cool. Now, if that story led you to an awful case of FOMO, here's an easy and an inclusive fun fact about myself that almost 9% of my friends will be shocked by. I actually really hate warm weather, and I've actually discussed this topic on Trent Radio before, especially since all of my radio shows have been during the summer, and anybody who's ever taken the time in the summer months to do a radio show can tell you that those recording booths get quite hot, and I don't think that that's going to to really be good for me when I'm under these blankets. So I'm going to promise that I'm definitely going to, as I mentioned before, be under a blanket, but not necessarily be in my bed. But also partially, part of my broadcasts will likely be outside of sheets. I have a specific show in mind that I mentioned to a friend, and I'm excited to start doing recordings for it, where we're going to do a picnic on a blanket. As I said, all the themes do need to be around my concept, but we're going to play loosely, and we're going to get there however we can. So yeah, I have plenty of episodes planned with a variety of topics that relate to positivity and being present and kind of self-care, self-nurturing, and nurturing positive future. And that's kind of an idea that I wanted to work with overall, is this concept of self-care and what we can do to make both our worlds better, or the world around us. I'm very much one of those people that believes that what we do and how we act around ourselves truly affects the people around us in ways that we don't know, and I'm one of those people that believes in like chain of action. And so if I do a good thing, then, you know, maybe that will make the world a bit better, and that's kind of what I want to do in this show. My friends that who have done these shows with me know that I'm actually kind of a meticulous planner at times, and especially when I'm starting a show, I'm really into it. And so I'm hoping that because I'm so enthused and I'm writing down all these ideas, that we can actually get to a point where you are also excited for me for the next show to come. And so in that vein, I want to share with you some concepts that I have written down here. So right now, the show that you're listening to right now is the very first episode. So the show that you're listening to is called Blankets, ! And then in brackets, Metaphorically Speaking, : an introduction show. Nothing too exciting in that way. But I want to do a show around going on a picnic. I'm considering doing a show about crochet, and I've actually bought the tools to do that. We're going to talk about upcycling baby blankets and other kind of things, blanket hoodies, and I don't want to keep going because there are a lot of really cool and interesting ideas, I think, on this list. But you'll just have to tune in to find out, to see exactly if there's something that maybe you and I have in common. So right now, all I want to do is get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. Again, metaphorically speaking. I was thinking, and I actually had a friend from back in the day, oh my god, I sound so old, back from when I was early 20s, helped me figure out different idioms that blanket exists within. And so I found this website, it's called freedictionary.com, and they have lists of idioms that exist, and you can look up a specific word. And so I looked up blanket, and there are many different blanket related idioms. The first one that comes up, of course, is blanket someone or something with something, so to cover with something. So you can blanket somebody with something, or make a blanket statement, or a storm can blanket something, which is the example that they give. Then there's also a blanket drill, which is a military term for sleep. I have never heard that before. Maybe you have. But I'm not from a military family, at least not in the past generation. And I wasn't very close to my grandfather, who was in the military. Not for any sad reasons, just because distance mostly. And so, never heard of that one. I've got blanket fever, which is like meant to be a funny, it sounds like a very like, I hate to be that person, baby boomer-esque concept. It says, a humorous phrase that describes the impulse to stay in bed all day and not do anything. It says, as a medical condition. That doesn't sound like one should make fun of anybody who has a medical condition, but that is what that means, apparently. Then there's blanket term, security blanket, wet blanket, Some of these ones that I thought were really interesting are eyes like two burnt holes in a blanket, which is eyes that are ringed with dark circles. Never heard that, but that's kind of cool. Eyes like two holes in a blanket. So weird. And then there's also on the wrong side of the blanket, which reminded me of the idiom, which is like woke up on the wrong side of bed. And I thought that that's what it meant, but apparently it means parents that aren't married or out of wedlock. Like you were born on the wrong side of blanket. Wrong side of the blanket, mind you. Obviously a very old phrase, not something that is said anymore. I wonder if any of the people around my age know what that means, or even younger or older. Very curious. Throw a wet blanket over something. To be a wet blanket. I guess it's to make something less enjoyable. I can understand that. I mean, from a physical standpoint, I do understand that a wet blanket isn't fun, especially since, and I'm gonna say it again, I only have one blanket. So if I had a wet blanket, especially in the winter when I needed it, I would have a lot of problems. So, I mean, there are a lot of different concepts and thoughts and things that I can use as show ideas to do with blankets. If you can think of anything and you want to get a hold of me, I am setting up an Instagram page just so that people can check out what I'm doing and maybe even add some visual context to the audio recording part of the show. But the general idea of the show is to talk about stuff that I'm really into. And for those of you that don't really know me, there are quite a few things that I am into. Lately, I've been doing a lot of cooking, and I've been doing a lot of gardening. There are things I like talking about in reference to mental health stuff and how to be a better person to the environment. I have a lot of theories. I feel like I'm talking like Donald Trump right now. I have a lot of everything. I am the best. I'm amazing. I am not an orange dictator of sorts. Sorry. So I have so many wonderful ideas that I want to share with you, and I'm really excited about the show. In the last few minutes here of this episode, I just wanted to say thank you to anybody that has taken the time to listen to this specifically first episode. You can find me on Instagram. It is undermyblanket.ptbo. That is where you can find me for any posts and updates. Okay, I love you guys. Have a great evening.